Hello, my name is Jerri Lange, and I'm back again with an absolutely fabulous guest by the name of Noah Griffin. We did a show when I was at Channel 32 as general manager, and you brought Frank Jordan in, and you were his press secretary at the time.
I was his press secretary for about 3 years.
But we started out knowing each other as soon as you got out of law school.
Got out of law school in the early 70s, 70,
Yes.
71.
And that was Harvard?
I got out of Harvard,
Right.
and I was a Coro Foundation fellow for a number of years.
And there weren't many black Harvard graduates at that time.
Not in those days. They've
No,
increased
in
the
those
number
days.
considerably. We were 22 out of 550 in our class, and now they've upped the number. And I'll be taking my daughter in a couple of weeks to interview to go to undergraduate school. So we'll
There
see
in
how that works
Harvard?
out. We're hoping.
We're hoping.
We'll
You
see.
will. She'll follow. You know, your father's incredible. We'll be talking about him too. But first of all, we're calling you a historian archivist, which is, we know about archives, we know about history, but tell me what that is and some of the things you've been doing, because you've been doing some fascinating things.
Well, I like to collect and document black history, and it's been an avocational passion of mine now, more of a full-time passion of mine for a number of years. And it takes you to various places. I was back in Washington, D.C. not too long ago, where I visited Frederick Douglass's home. I've been to Gettysburg, which was the turning point of the Civil War. In February, I went back to the bicentennial of Abraham Lincoln's birth. I wanted black representation to be there. Watched many of the panels, went to his home, went to his law office. And there's a lot of controversy around Lincoln, but I think one of the things that came up there which convinced me of my point of view that he was a martyr as much as Martin Luther King or Viola Liuzzo was. The thing that triggered his death immediately was his call for black suffrage. He said that blacks should be able to vote, at least the most intelligent of them and those who fought for the Union cause. And Booth, hearing that, said, black voting rights, I'll be doggone, I'll run him through. But there's just so much. The most recent death of John Hope Franklin. His major instructor at Fisk University was Ted Currier, the class of 35. Ted Currier was my instructor from 63 to 67. So I met John Hope Franklin then, also met him again at the unveiling of the Black Civil War Veteran statue in Washington in 1998, where I read my poem at that unveiling. He co-signed a book that was dedicated to him and an autograph by Ted Currier. Then 2 years ago, when his autobiography came out, Amos Brown from Third Baptist Church asked me if I would introduce John Hope Franklin at Third Baptist Church, and what a thrill it was at the twilight of his life to be able to introduce him. And he signed his wonderful autobiography, which I really commend to folks to read.
And I was going to say, let's talk about John Hope Franklin a bit, because there may be some people out there that don't know what a great historian he was.
John Hope Franklin majored in history at Fisk, was the first African American to get his doctorate in history from Harvard. And in 1947, he published the landmark work, From Slavery to Freedom. You know, it wasn't until the 60s that black history became a recognized field of endeavor in major colleges and universities throughout the nation. But 20 years before that, John Hope Franklin wrote that book. Now, in the mid-60s, he wrote the textbook Land of the Free, which showed it was a standard 8th grade text proposed to be all through the state of California. It included the contributions of African Americans, Asian and women. Now, Max Rafferty was superintendent of schools, and he opposed it, as did the John Birch Society. Dr. Dan Collins was on the State Board of Education at that time. They got that book adopted as a statewide book.
Wonderful.
There was so much controversy, it only lasted for 2 years. Max Rafferty was ousted from the state of California, superintendent of schools, went to Alabama, and in the process of doing so, it was said that he raised the IQ of both states.
I'm sure he did. Well, you know, you told me an interesting story about Frederick Douglass when you visited him, and how he supported women. I thought
he was a major supporter. I think he was the first male feminist. I was asked at one of the anniversaries of Roe versus Wade to come up with a black, by Nancy Walker, who was president of the Board of Supervisors in San Francisco, to come up with a black male feminist. And I thought it was Frederick Douglass, and I was right. In 1848, he was at Seneca Falls, where women established the beginning of women's rights movement. He was asked to be the president of the women's organization. He said, no, it should go to a woman. When he established his newspaper, which was called the North Star, his partner, Martin Delaney, said we should call it the Brethren. He said, no, a name like the Brethren excludes women. Initially, when the 15th Amendment passed, giving the rights to vote, he questioned why it didn't include women. The last day of his life, February 20th, 1895, he went to a suffragettes meeting. I don't know anybody in the 19th century that had better credentials than that, than
Isn't
Frederick
that
Douglass.
great? Because, you know, we never hear that side of all the things he's done, but that just notches him up another level here.
Amazing
because
man.
you know we've had very few men that came in and championed in women's rights at that time.
And his home in Anacostia is there in Washington, D.C. We just went there recently. It was purchased in 1877 and it cost him $15,000. And he would walk into Washington every day because he thought exercise should be a regular part of your day, not just something special. Right. His second wife was able to preserve the home, bought it back from the children who had sold it, and now it's a National Historic Monument.
Tell me about your father.
My father was born the last of 14 children in rural Florida in 1896. I always say the highlight of his father's life was emancipation in 1865. The highlight of my father's life was the 1954 decision after being born the year of Plessy versus Ferguson, which legalized segregation. He graduated from a private school in 1915, a private high school, became principal of a 4-teacher school. After going away to World War I, he realized a high school degree was not comprehensive. He entered Fisk at the age of 23 at 1919, finished Fisk in Latin and Greek, got his master's at the University of Iowa in 1926, worked on his doctorate in Indiana. When he contracted tuberculosis, married my mother, did not go into a sanitarium as two other people who did, who contracted tuberculosis, who died. Taught at a host of Southern black colleges, wound up in the Florida State school system where they were paying black teachers 47% of what they paid white teachers by law. Fought it, lost in state court, had taught Thurgood Marshall at Lincoln University in 1929. Thurgood, who was then working with the NAACP, the Legal Defense Fund, said, let's try this in federal district court under the 14th Amendment. It took them 6 years. They won. My parents were barred from teaching for life in Florida. Roy Wilkins then asked my father if he would like a position with the NAACP establishing the Western Regional States. So Thanksgiving Day 1944, he came to San Francisco and established the Western Regional States. Did the same thing in the Midwest in '56. My mother refused to raise us children in the South. This was in Kansas City.
Right.
So essentially he retired in '56. They had a Noah Griffin Day all over Florida in '43. And in 1965, when they merged the Black and White Teachers Association, they called my father back to give him an award. And then 20 years after he had passed, they were still honoring him back in Florida. So he was a very quiet, unassuming, but highly principled man, very active in the African American Historical and Cultural Society in San
And now
Francisco.
you're talking about DNA. Tell me about that.
My wife, Meredith, asked me if I would do a DNA sample for my Christmas gift, which I did. And it came back 6 weeks later for my birthday, and I found out that my people originated in Ghana, Sierra Leone, and Guinea-Bissau. That's on my mother's side. On my father's side, it goes back to Spain and Portugal. So it's kind of an interesting combination because they were slavers there. And when I looked back in the archive, I wanted to find out if any blacks fought in the Civil War. Well, Noah Griffins, there were 10 Noah Griffins who fought in the Civil War.
You're kidding. 2
were black, so it forced me to go to the archives to look up my family history. Now, my grandfather, who was born in 1852, is mulatto. His 2 brothers were black, so he was a product of the Union as a slave master, and my great-grandmother. So more than likely that Spanish and that Portuguese blood came in through there, which I never would have known had I not done the DNA.
Right. Isn't that a fascinating discovery? DNA has just changed the whole.
AfricanAncestry.com, and they'll tell you how to get the kit and how you go and how you take the swabs.
Anyone can do it.
Anyone can do it.
Oh my goodness!
And you send back on your mother's side and on your father's side, and then 6 weeks later they bring you back all the information.
Isn't that wonderful? Amazon.com.
African Ancestry.
AfricanAncestry.com. Okay, AfricanAncestry.com. Well, that's information that's priceless, really.
It is.
It really is. Well, we go on to all the other wonderful things you're doing. You are involved in something now that you are that has to do with historical reference.
I am currently writing a book on the history of blacks in San Francisco from World War II forward. I've just completed an hour-long lecture for the African American Historical and Cultural Society on the history of blacks in San Francisco, which leads into the history of blacks in California. California was named for Queen Calafia, who was an Amazon queen, from a book from Montalvo in 1510 talking about a magic island where it's inhabited by black Amazons. And all of the implements, the harnesses for their animals, their weapons were all made of gold. So when Coronado comes here and discovers this area, he calls it California, basically.
Well, now tell me this, where were these women, Amazon women, where
in
were
this
they
this mythical island that was west of India. And so when Portola, Dianza, Drake, all the explorers had Africans with them. There was a fellow by the name of Estebanico who was crashed on